to talk about Agile and cybersecurity. So let's start the conversation in the right place. What is Agile, or what do you think Agile is? Who wants to start it off?
I think I talked enough.
Listen, I do everything interactively, so jump in. I know all of you guys have thoughts on Agile. So what is it in your experience? All right, I guess you're up. Sorry.
Don't make us select names randomly.
I call that being voluntold. So if you're in one of my sessions, I've been known to call out names.
Agile, the name suggests it's doing stuff like fast.
Yeah, listen, Agile is...
It's an iterative and incremental approach to software development, as opposed to waterfall, where you have first the requirements and you try to go through all the various steps, and then maybe by the time you finish, you notice that you have the wrong requirement. So Agile is more iterative, so you're able to, you're supposed to deliver quick your artifacts to have, for example, a minimum viable product, and iterate fast, so that if you can detect earlier if you have to change requirement or something is wrong. So in theory, it's good for the business.
Absolutely. So for those of you who don't remember, in the dark ages before Agile, working with IT was, if you're a business person, you wrote up a 200-page document that described what you wanted from a software, and you gave it to your IT people. And 2 or 3 years later, if you're lucky, you got back something that looked like a product. It may or may not have done what you wanted, but good luck trying to get them to change it. So that was where IT and business were before Agile and Scrum. What Agile did is say this idea that people should know what they want 2 years and then be expected to match up perfectly. That's just not reality. So let's try to do something in small batches so that people can see work in progress and give us changes. Scrum fundamentally is designed to make it easier and cheaper to change software. Like that's the problem it's trying to solve. And it worked tremendously, became a big hit. Everybody wants to now do things the Agile way. And great, if you're in software development, Scrum, Agile are easy. It's made for each other. But if you're doing work outside of IT, or even more generally outside of software development, Agile is going to look different. For starters, Agile is not Scrum. And I end up having to say that pretty much for every client I work with. So when we say work in Agile way, it does not necessarily mean that we're doing things in Scrum, okay? All we're trying to do is build in some transparency into what we do and do things incrementally, iteratively, so that we can all see what's happening and make changes as we go along. The basic idea here is visibility and not blindsiding people.
So Agile would be a belief structure rather than like a actual process even.
It's both. I mean, we talk about Agile mindset and Agile process. It is both. And that's a discussion you'll have endlessly in the Agile community. So for me, it's both. It's people and process. It's allowing people to choose how they work together for a shared goal. And it is the processes that enable this collaboration and transparency across large numbers of people. You have to have both of those in order to deliver the value of Agile. So here,
just on the process side, where you deliver incrementally, I think what's really critical there is you have to determine what those increments are and what the corresponding value of those increments are. You know, so everything that is produced incrementally needs to be something that's usable and has value.
Absolutely. And all of this is going to be contextual. So let me see if I can share my slides and we'll see if it cooperates. Okay, give me 30 seconds. So some of you already know me now. I tend to jump around with slides. So whatever the definition of Agile we come to, for cybersecurity, every Agile initiative represents risk. When I first started working cybersecurity teams, they were like, oh my God, you're the Agile person. No, we don't want Agile. Like it doesn't work for us. Like, okay, wait, hold on. Help me understand more. And as I started working with them more, I realized from their perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, the Agile initiatives, whether you call it Agile transformation, digital transformation, whatever it is, it's expanding the amount of ground they have to cover. It's opening up all these new variables, which does make their job harder. So you do have to recognize that conversation first. And once I started, okay, tell me more about this, I learned more about cybersecurity. Here are some parallels that I noticed between agility and cybersecurity. One is these are both what we call emergent domains, which is a very fancy way of saying we don't know what we don't know, and things are going to come up. And in order to survive in the emergent domain, you have to be able to see around the corner, because there's no straight path for the next 3 years or next even 3 months for a lot of organizations. So you have to develop a bit of a foresight. Both these domains are very much interdisciplinary. There is no such thing as a cybersecurity person. There's so many different facets to it and different people doing it. Same thing, we talked about Agile and DevOps. No one person is an expert in all of it. You need to have multiple people working together to make these things happen. And the way we make it happen, the abilities that I call sense and respond. The idea is that you have to kind of sense what's happening and be able to respond proportionally. In neither domain do we have the ability to say, please hold on, I have to go check with my managers and get approval before I can do this. Those things just don't happen for agility or cybersecurity. As something comes up, we have to respond. So how do we develop this ability in an organization? It's hard, not many organizations do it well. And I think all of you'd agree that both these domains tend to be chaotic and uncertain. Unexpected things come up. We can have the best plan in the world and then there's a curveball. This is very much the norm. And ultimately, when we're trying to pursue agility or cybersecurity, it's not a single deliverable that we can check off. It's a organizational capability that is a constant juggling act of different priorities. I know organizations that want agility, but they also want governance. They want compliance. And sometimes these don't always play together. And there are some trade-offs. And that is very true for cybersecurity. There is this ideal cybersecurity response, and then there's the real world. And trying to figure out where your particular organization can find its footing is a little bit tricky. Anyone have questions about these parallels that I've noticed in these two fields?
Yeah, it's as Valerie mentioned, it's too much dependent on the culture, I guess, because you want to give people the autonomy, but when you give them the autonomy, you also have to have that non-blame culture so that they can use that autonomy, so they can take steps without the fear of doing something very wrong. The world is going to end. So how do you do that? It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, when Agile calls it failing fast. And the idea is you are going to fail. We're trying to do something new for the first time all the time. There's going to be failures. Those failures are part of our learning process. So let's do small things. Let's fail fast and small, learn from those and be better. If you are a leader who's expecting a straightforward Agile transformation, yeah, there's a bridge I want to sell you. Okay, no, it's never going to happen. It's people. Anytime you involve people as an outcome, it's going to get a little messy. It's going to be some failures involved. If you're doing small things, if you're failing fast, if you're learning from those failures, you are going to continue to get better. You're going to develop, think about almost like an exercise routine. The more you do something, the more your muscles are built for that. And that is very true of cultural attributes like agility and security. This is a cultural attribute within an organization. You have to let your people build up this maturity, build up their muscles in these areas.
And you can't do that without your leaders doing it.
Okay. Is it possible to do agility or security from the bottom up? Yes, to a certain extent. Once you go past a certain level of maturity, you have to have your leaders on board. What I see most often, and I've been doing Agile transformation now for 15 years, it starts from the bottom, it rolls up a little bit, and then it comes from top down, it meets in the middle. And sometimes it dies in the middle, but that's a whole different story. You can start doing security best practices at whatever level you are with your teams, with your individual, you can start there. At some point though, you're going to have to get your leadership on board because it has to be an organizational attribute. Okay. So when I talk about agility, I'm not talking about Scrum or Kanban or any of the frameworks. I'm talking about a core set of principles. And these are the 4 things that I will absolutely live and breathe by. So one of them is we know the least when we start something, whether that is an agile transformation or building towards cybersecurity or just a new team. We don't know what we don't know. And recognizing that we don't know means don't have a prescriptive plan. Don't say this is how we're going to do for the next 6 years, because you just don't know. Start small. Keep your plans very open-ended. Allow for emergence of value and discovery. And when you know the least at start, the corollary is go broad before you go deep. That means don't try to build the perfect tool for this one particular piece before you figure out what is your cybersecurity path. Where are you going towards? Another part of going broad before going deep is start from the outcomes in. What does cybersecurity mean for organization? So I work with federal government, US, and healthcare. For them, cybersecurity is a very specific thing. If you're doing insurance or finance, it means a very different set of priorities. Figure out what it means for you and have that big picture in mind first before you try to make any one practice essential. So my recommendation is, before we talk about tools and specific things, let's try to get the broad strokes. What do we mean by cybersecurity? What does it mean for us? What are we going to be like as an organization if we are cyber secure? Do we have more people? Do we have everything locked down? Try to figure some of those things out. At the very least, start having the conversations. Okay. The third principle is what most people think about Agile, the idea of cadence and time boxing. And the reason it matters is when you're trying to get people to change the way they think and work, that's a lot of change for a lot of people. So having certain things at certain intervals, the cadence part, it gives our brains a set of anchoring points. Okay, yes, this is a lot right now, but I know in 2 weeks I will have a chance to stop and ask some questions. Giving people that sense of anchoring and familiarity, it allows them to manage the disruption that is part of Agile. And time boxing is also connected to that, because when we're changing the way people think, which is a big part of agility and cybersecurity, this is not the only thing on people's plates. We're asking them to do this work in addition to all the other things they have as part of their job. It's not like the rest of the organization hits pause while we transform. We're trying to do both. So time boxing is critically important. Recognize that what we're doing as change agents, it's adding on to a full plate. So something as small as be aware of how much time you're asking from people. Start and end on time. Don't have meetings if you don't have to. Like all of those little things, it makes the difference, okay? And the fourth one is probably the absolute critical one for me. And I call it the reality of human behavior. So when I first started doing Agile, I was like, wait, Scrum, this is amazing. Wow, great. And then I got into working with federal agencies. Yeah, nothing from the textbook applies if you're a government agency. It's just the rules are completely different. When we first came up with Scrum, it was designed for small cross-functional teams. Well, in government, there's all kinds of power dynamics, there's all kinds of constraints you have to work within. And Agile there simply does not look like what it looks like in textbooks. And for me, that was a really hard thing to wrap my head around. Wait, but this is the right Agile, right? And I should be doing that. No, the right Agile is what matters in your particular context. Who are the people you're trying to help? What do they care about? What do they think? How do they work? You do have to map the textbook best practices to what's happening for the people you're trying to work with. Any questions or disagreements on these four?
I'm actually, I was interested in you bringing up how the government works with Agile. That's very fascinating. I was thinking about it in terms of an investigation or a company that does investigations. So it's kind of an interesting thing.
I'm not sure I understood go broad before deep.
Okay, so it's human nature to try to make things perfect. We want it to be just right. We want to give ourselves solid building blocks. With agility, and I think also with cybersecurity, making it perfect is, don't let good be the enemy of the perfect kind of thing. Aim for good enough, because it is going to change. And that's the inherent reality of all this. There's no abstract perfect. It's fit for purpose. But if the purpose keeps changing, your fit is going to have to change. So think about the broad strokes and work from that angle before you try to make any one piece perfect. Does that help?
A little, but I'm still hearing like do little things. So it does seem like not a deep, but small bits rather than broad. What is the broad?
Broad picture is the outcome. It's agility, it's cybersecurity, what it means for you. And then you find small things to get there. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It just start with the outcome and really make it contextual. I tend to have clients say, oh, I want Agile. I'm like, okay, Agile is not something you buy. Okay, it's a how. I think Alexandra was saying earlier session, agility, security, these are hows. You have to have an outcome that actually matters to you from a business perspective. Yes, David, we're on the same page. Awesome. Okay, so the way I do all of these things, because organizations want a roadmap, they want a picture, they want to know how they get from here to there. So what I came up with is something called a compass for agility. And what I was trying to solve with this approach is the idea that we want Agile. Let's just start putting in Scrum teams. I'm like, hold on. Why do you want Agile? What is the problem you're trying to solve? How do you know it's the right solution for you? And where can you start? Because if we don't do the first 3 steps of discovery, if we don't do discovery first, we end up doing a 5-year Agile transformation that basically relabels people, adds in new ceremonies, and doesn't actually change the culture or get things out faster. I think most of you are familiar with that scenario. And after talking to clients about, hold on, this is just not, you just can't jump into Agile. I created this process where I do make my clients go through all this. So if you say you want Agile, we're going to spend some time on ideation, which is what is your vision, identification, your reality check, and then we're going to have a conversation about what is the gap between your vision and your reality. Are we packing for a 5-mile journey, 500 miles, or 5,000 miles? Do we know? This is very important because only then can we actually start doing. And doing is the inaction step where we're actually going to start doing that typical Agile Scrum getting to done part. And then finally, we do have to stop, and instead of just inspection adapt, I call it introspection because we're looking all the way back entire circle. Was your vision actually on target? Did we do a good job assessing where the organization is, or did we miss something? Did we prioritize the right things? Did we get things done well? And then we do the whole thing again based on what we have learned. So this is a way, a compass of navigating emergent domains like agility or cybersecurity. There are some touch points that keep us going. So the 5 steps you do have to do, the 3 symbols on top each step, they're the techniques. Because I come from Agile space, small, medium, large. Small is half a day, medium is a full day, large is 2 days. So if you're working with me, I will make you go through this step. So at the very minimal, we're going to do half a day, and a half day, 1.5 day before we get into doing. And that is something organizations will say yes to. If I want to have 6 months of discovery, like, no, we don't have time for that. This is just too important. I will never get 6 months in an Agile space, but I can usually get a day and a half. You work with what you have. You go through this process at a very high level, and then you start working. Okay.
Oh.
Yes. Questions?
Oh no, sorry, that was just my my microphone. My bad.
No worries. Okay. So
A question though.
Yeah.
So your customer in this case, are they the like head of cyber, but someone on at the head level of security? Is it usually?
It's usually the CISO or sometimes the CTO, CIO, somebody who's responsible for a big business outcome. And in terms of agility, it can be a VP of product, it can be a CEO sometimes. So it's usually a VP or C-suite person who is responsible for organizational transformation. And I'm supposed to be helping with that.
And how much do they need to know about the rest of the organization and their cultures?
Perfect question. So it depends on the scope of the problem. If we're doing it for cybersecurity with a CISO, I'm going to ask, do we have your CEO's buy-in? Can we get them involved? Is your cybersecurity department completely kind of in your own little place, or are you working with other people? Can we get your CTO involved? Who else needs to be in this conversation? The basic idea here is, depending on the scope of what we're trying to change, we want to have representatives that can be responsible for that scope. So if you are a CISO who's doing a transformation for an entire organization, I will ask you, can we invite some of your product people? Can we invite some business stakeholders? Best case answer is yes. Worst case answer is, well, they're not quite ready yet. I'm like, okay, let's start off without them. But at some point, if you want this to be organizational change, they have to be on board. Otherwise, we're going to end up writing a manual or a framework that's going to sit in an office somewhere, and it's actually not going to change people's behavior or organizational culture.
That's a really, really important point. I think is definitely worth stressing. Because there've been lots of organizations. I'll just take kind of a security specific example whereby, you know, the change transformation.
Nigger. Shout out to Pingu. Shout out to Pingu.
Okay, person removed.
I swear that wasn't me. Okay, right. So I was just saying it's a really important point to stress.
And that person stressed it beautifully, I think.
Sorry.
Lots of emphasis.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen the organizations where the change transformation business within it has transformed to Agile, and you know, they've been running a year-long change transformation program, and then they've invited the security function who hasn't been on that journey and have then suddenly presented a 3-month waterfall-based security plan. That just kind of ruins everything. So that has happened and does happen a lot. So yeah, really important point.
It happened. The fundamental rule with change is, you know, what we always get told is, oh, people hate change. That has not been my experience. People don't like having change imposed on them. That is a very, very different mindset. A lot of what we try to do in agility, just basic coaching 101, is you invite people, you co-create with them. You don't impose change on people. Okay, you know, here's where we're trying to go. Do we all want to go there? What is the value of this destination for all of us? Talking a business case earlier, that is part of the business case. Why does this matter to the rest of the organization? Okay.
So my curiosity is how you apply this in situations that have more, I guess, rigidity or more rules around what you can do or what you can't do. Not unwillingness to change, but the incapability perhaps of changing within the given environment and rigid rule structure.
Welcome to my world. As I said, most of my clients are US federal government agencies. They are very rigid. They are very compliance driven, and there are tons and tons of explicit and implicit things that thou shalt not do. Like, that is the culture of most of these organizations. So what happens in those organizations is this kind of approach is even more important, because we'll figure out what other options do we have. Very often when we try to change and agility or cybersecurity, I think we go into, okay, let's figure out the plan, let's give people a plan, and let's have them implement the plan. What we're trying to do with this approach is, how else could we maneuver around this organization? How else could we make change happen? Because the way we're used to doing it is not going to work. So for example, there's something on here called the impact and inquiry map. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and show you what that could look like. Okay, when we try to implement a plan, it's everybody do this and let's just check out the boxes. Instead of that, we could use something like an impact map that says for each targeted cybersecurity outcome, and make your outcome fairly specific, who are the actors, the people who are going to help us achieve or not achieve this goal? Because when you're trying for this kind of organizational attribute, it comes down to people. You need people on board to change behavior and culture. So once you identify your actors, for each actor, so in this example, for a cybersecurity outcome, you need leaders on board. Okay, what do you need leaders to do? The behaviors that will help you achieve this outcome are probably going to be understand the ROI of cybersecurity and support employee training, rather than grumble about it and say, my God, I've seen you for training again, I have real work to do. This is the behaviors that you want from your leaders. Great. Now, the last column is what can we do to facilitate or enable that behavior? So for example, if you want to get your leaders to understand ROI, maybe we do lunch and learns for leaders. What is cybersecurity? Why should you care? Make it something casual. Food is a good way to bribe people. I have learned that it works. So offering food, having a casual conversation, work with even very busy people. Something else that you can do is, if you have a CISO on board, maybe they do a board presentation, high visibility, high value, maybe that would work. And you can brainstorm any number of different options. And that is the value of this approach. It's not a compliance driven, it's creating a canvas of options. Think about, I sometimes semi-seriously joke that my job is half being a bad bartender, half being a bad scientist. So bartender, because people have to trust me and tell me their life stories, which they do. The other half is mad scientist, because I'm sort of like, ooh, what will happen if I do this? Because I'm fascinated by people and processes. So if you can think of yourself as having all these levers on how you can move an organization, which lever do you pull when? And you don't do all of these simultaneously or in sequence. You look at these options and say, which will give me the most value right now? And then you implement that one. And then you'll see, for example, let's say we schedule 3 lunch and learns for different groups of leaders. At the end of those lunch and learns, we come back and say, you know, did we get leaders who now understand the ROI of cybersecurity? Maybe along with lunch and learns, we do a little survey that validates this. So now we've learned, oh, lunch and learns are a really good way to help leaders understand the ROI, which should help us improve our cybersecurity outcome. On the other hand, if no one showed up to lunch and learn, you learned a lot. Okay, the best way to reach leaders is not lunch and learns. So how else could I reach leaders? Does this make it clear?
So in a sense, exercising the principles of social engineering and a slight bit about or kind of figuring out how a little bit of recon would work in there.
Yes, different language, but absolutely yes. It's really a people-centric view of the world. So if we want people to change their behavior, how could we? And most people don't respond very well to, here's a new plan, go follow it. Like that just doesn't work very well. And if that's what you're going to do, you're not going to get very far. But could you try other ways to get buy-in? And there's a quote I love in cybersecurity that kind of clicked for me. This idea that we want a security culture, not a compliance culture. People have to understand and behave in a way that shows they value security, not just because they were told to. And I'm butchering the exact quote, but that's the kind of approach that I use for agile transformation that also work for cybersecurity, because that's what I've been doing for the last year or two.
I really like that, thank you.
Okay, awesome. Anyone else have questions about this kind of approach? Does it translate? Okay. The one thing I hope you'll notice is the options are going to be very, very unique for every organization. It is going to be what could happen in your organization. So many of us are conditioned to problem solving by, wait, fix it. Okay, let me go put out the fire. In this approach, you're going to stop for a second and say, wait, is that fire actually a big problem? Or is it just kind of local little thing, it'll burn itself out? Can I spend some time looking at root causes of fires rather than just putting it out automatically? Can I train other people to fight fires? That's the approach that you want to take on, because creating and maintaining culture, whether it's for agility or security, it's not a one-person task. It's not a team task. It's an everybody task. If you want to maintain that culture, you have to get everybody on board. Okay, so kind of going back to how we get there. Okay, so I talked about ideation. So cybersecurity people I've talked to are like, well, we already know this. Why aren't you guys simply doing it? I'm like, okay, you know this. I don't. The rest of us don't. What do we mean by cybersecurity? What are you trying to achieve here? What is your best case scenario for cybersecurity? What is your MVP? Like, what is the thing that if we don't do, the company is going to burn down? Can we start there first? And then we'll do every other best practice that you have. Okay. For identification, where are we now? Do we actually have a cybersecurity maturity process? Government agencies, they all have them right now. There's no one who doesn't have a cybersecurity policy, but a lot of them are pretty thin. A lot of it boils down to when you have a new employee onboarding, do a cybersecurity training, and then periodic email reminder, don't write your password down, be careful. Like, that's the bare bones level of cybersecurity maturity. That's not really going to help, but we have to know where we are, okay? And I talk about in here relationships. It's fairly common and actually fairly understandable that if you're in IT or security or transformation, whatever your specialty happens to be, you're going to see the rest of the organization from those lenses. It's really important to step outside of that perspective and get to know people, get them to know you. So for cybersecurity people, this is particularly important because this domain, on one hand, it should be obvious value to everybody. Is there anybody who doesn't know that data breaches are a bad thing? No. But do they really understand why and how it matters to them? Probably not. I mentioned earlier session, whether you guys like it or not, you're going to end up with some coaching responsibilities of being educators and facilitators, because this is still a very, very new world for a lot of people. And there's so many changes happening so fast, they'll need a guide. And sometimes some of you guys are going to be elected for those roles. So just be prepared that that might end up on your plate. Is anyone actually doing that kind of coaching facilitation, even though it's not part of your actual job? Yes, no, maybe? No? Okay. In that case, I'm assuming that you guys have actually people who are coaches who are doing this, or it hasn't become a problem yet. But in a lot of places I've seen, it happens. So intake is sort of where the American phrase of the rubber meets the road. It basically says, where do we start? There's so much that needs to happen. And this is true for almost all organizations. We don't have infinite capacity. And as we talked about earlier, those people have other jobs and things to do. So understanding what is our capacity in terms of our change agents, in terms of our cybersecurity team, in terms of our training team, like how much capacity do they have to do more work? And think about organizational capacity. Organizations are not people, but they are systems. And there's so many things happening in organizations these days where it limits their capacity to absorb new changes. If they're already doing an agile transformation and they're experiencing a recession and they're also having to do end of the year tax deadlines, there's a lot going on with an organization. Do they really have the capacity to absorb a lot more changes? Be very sensitive to that and be realistic about what is actually doable here, okay? And a large part here is, again, building relationships, okay? Start with information exchange. You hear me, I hear you. And then being able to convert that information exchange to actually mutual understanding, shared interest. Wait, we're coming from two different places that we both agree on this small thing. Can we start there? That's where you're going to start prioritizing, okay? Because trying to make change happen, broken record, but compliance really gets you minimal ROI. If you can find a shared interest, you're going to be so much more successful, okay?
Be the change.
Be the change, and which sounds easy, the reality is a little bit harder. The one thing that I will say is not even contextual is relationships. You have to build relationships. You have to get to know people. They have to get to know you. And you can't do it just when you want something from them. And relationships don't work that way. So, do the prep work before you have a need to tap people and say, hey, can you help me with this? So a lot of this is just being a good person who's interested in other people. So ask questions, learn, get to know each other. If you have built that groundwork, cultural change is going to be a lot easier, okay? Finally, this is the thing people think about Agile. The Scrum board, Kanban board, what are we doing? Are we getting things done? Yes, but we don't start here. If you start here, you're going to get random actions done, but you're not going to move the needle in terms of people's behavior. And that is really Cybersecurity is a culture. It's not a process. It's not a checklist. And you need to work on building that culture, and it takes a while. So that's why I would really emphasize, do the discovery, figure out what people know, what they don't know, what they want, what they value before you start saying, here's your new cybersecurity training, please go take it. I just started a new engagement and I had to do that. They were like, so we need you to do 2-hour cybersecurity compliance training. I'm like, seriously, on my first day, I have real work to do. Like, that was my attitude, even knowing and valuing cybersecurity. So be prepared for that perception and try to avoid it. Finally, take the time to inspect what you can do. We're talking earlier about how do you be part of the change. If you have agile teams in your organization, ask, can I join your retrospective? Now, not every team is going to be open to this. Sometimes retrospectives are team-only spaces, and that's totally fine. But maybe you can create a lessons learned opportunity for the rest of the organization, just with your team, or frankly, do it by yourself. What have I tried? What has worked? What has not worked? What am I learning from this process? Because insanity is doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results. Try not to lose your sanity because it matters. So retrospectives are a way of learning from our own mistakes, learning from our strengths, because sometimes the most unlikely approaches pay off. So having a broad canvas, trying different things, and being able to take the time to look at what's working and what's not working, it really does make a difference. And most importantly, course correct. So I will say this for anybody who's doing any kind of organizational change. If you are continuing with your plan as planned for 6 months or a year, yeah, you're missing something, because there's no such thing as a perfect plan. That's completely correct. If you're not taking into account feedback, if you're not adapting, you're either the world's most brilliant change agent, in which case I want to learn from you, or you're not accounting for feedback and human behavior. The way I typically do something like this is Agile. I work in time boxes. It's a 30-day cycle, repeated 3 times with every new effort or every new problem. And it's 3 times because the first time I'm fully doing it for them. Second time I'm partnering with them to do it together. The third time they're doing it and I provide feedback. After this 3 time, it becomes theirs. They own it and they don't need me anymore. The techniques that I found most helpful in cybersecurity are the impact map. Impact map shifts the conversation from cybersecurity, the compliance, to how could I get people to understand and change behavior. I would highly, highly recommend that if you're trying to create a new cybersecurity strategy or implementation for your company. So example, the impact map. What I often recommend is something called a kaleidoscope. And this is a technique I created where let's put down all the things that we're doing and group related things together to be aware of what else we're trying to do. Can we leverage? In the earlier session, we're talking about if you're doing DevSecOps, build on top of DevOps. This is kind of what I mean. Look at what else is happening in an organization that you can be a part of, rather than creating a whole new stream of work. We mentioned training earlier. If you're a training department, can they embed a little bit of cybersecurity culture into just regular onboarding? Do we have to have a whole separate training? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But could we consider that? Could we consider how to leverage existing efforts? And that's part of the kaleidoscope. And then value stream map is one I often do recommend.
We do have a question in chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Would you have an example of a security impact map?
So yes, because I do them. Unfortunately, I cannot share them because remember, my work is always under NDA. So if you're doing this, okay, so sorry, I can't share in the question. Okay, so
the follow-up question to that is, do you start from the security and map to the business, or start from the business?
Depends on who my client is. Most often in this case, a client is a CISO, right? So we start from security and work our way back to the business. You start with where you are, and the example that I share with you, it's a artificial example because as I said, I can't share real examples, but there's some things in here that, okay, there we go. Bear with me while Okay, there we go. Go back to, okay. In this scenario, this is actually a real example that I just took a lot of detail out of. When you do this for real, it's going to be about 10 times the size. There's going to be a lot more actors. There's going to be the orange boxes for every single actor. Like this thing gets big. We're talking about a wall or, you know, a huge number of whiteboards that get together to make this. What you really want to start with here is, if you know, for example, we want to go to the next level of our maturity process, that's your outcome. Or it could simply be, at least in the US, we have this new federal mandate we have to be in compliance with. Well, that means that everybody now has to have their passwords changed every 30 days, and the passwords have to be 8 letters, not 6 letters. Whatever it is, the outcome that you want, you start from there. And then you cast your net really wide open. This example of divergent thinking, rather than simply saying, okay, I'm going to have a training department create a new thing around why passwords to change, and I'm going to have our IT people implement a new rule to make passwords 8 letters. Like that's the traditional way of doing this. What I'm suggesting is think about how can you actually convince people, for example, that changing passwords is in their best interest. Something that really did work for a client of mine is people had a hard time remembering bigger or longer passwords. So what they did in the screen where the password change was a little message popped up and said, you're being prompted to change your password to one that is 12 digits. Here's a tip to help you create your 12-digit passwords. And they gave an example of, think about your favorite song and think of the first letters, and that's how you create 12-digit password that you can remember. That simple little pop-up screen explanation made it so much more easier for people to remember more complex passwords. That is an example of the behavior-driven approach. Did that translate?
Yeah, makes sense.
Most Agile things should make sense. This is what I mean by the reality of human behavior. Think about how people actually are. For any of you who want to do an impact map, I'm happy to help you one-on-one. One of the drawbacks to do the kind of work I do, all of my client work cannot be shared by definition. So, and when I try to create fake example, it feels very fake because when you do it for real, it involves typically 10, 12 people, all of their shared knowledge and expertise in a particular context. I can't put myself in 12 people's heads to come up with a 3-dimensional model that reflects reality. And so what you're seeing is a very, very thin slice. Recognize that the reality is going to be a lot more complex. Okay, that's kind of the big picture. So questions, thoughts, comments?
I think I hear crickets.
I know, I was gonna say, okay, either you guys are completely convinced that Agile is great and you're gonna do this, or you're like, what is she talking about? This doesn't make sense. So either way, let's have that conversation.
May I ask, are all of, so you gave a diagram a moment ago that, actually, if you could go back to it, I don't even remember what all was on it, but
30 days, I think.
yeah, I think so. It's from, so the next one, I think after that. Maybe it was, yeah, no, sorry. It was right before the one that, next one.
That one?
We'll try the next one. Okay. The one, I don't even remember the name of it.
What did it look like?
Is it the timeline for the 30 days?
Yeah, it's the timeline.
Okay.
Timeline, got it.
That one, yeah. So do you have examples in these slides of each of these, like not examples like of from who you've worked with, but do you have at least a kind of a diagram of how they would look in these slides? Is that
not
so like,
in the slides, but in the book there are.
in the book, okay.
There is a book that describes all of this. Let me do this. Any particular techniques you're interested in, just email me and I'll send you a copy from the book. I do have those files. The book is available on the website. I'm happy to send you a link, but also just email me here. I'm going to put my email address in here and just send me an email with examples that you want, and I will share them. So what there is in the book is blank template. And I really resist using templates because if I give people templates, it turns into a compliance checklist. When I'm working with clients, I don't use any templates. It's a free-flowing, facilitated discussion, and the template emerges from that discussion. So the examples in the book are one possible way you could do this. There are any number of others. But yes, I'm happy to send you examples of those. Just if I have your email address, I will put it together. Okay, there's a question here.
She's also in our Slack channel if you guys want to message her from there. And JBI, do you want to unmute and voice your question?
What is your experience with putting a security specialist in a SME squad? Ooh, yes, this is one of your favorite questions. Okay. As an Agilist, I'm always going to advocate for cross-functional teams. So if you have a security team, rather than trying to do all of your work together, go be part of other teams. You're going to find a lot more value. It's going to help. They're going to get to know you. You're going to get to know them. And then you guys come back and meet on a regular cadence and bring back the questions and best practices from teams and say, you know, we really want people to do this, but they don't want to because of all these reasons. Can we address those reasons, or can we change our priority? This is critically important. When security is in a silo by themselves, they're just seen as a compliance people. They're seen as, oh God, security is making us do more things. Like the value proposition gets lost. If you are part of the product and part of the teams, you're going to build a culture. You're going to get more people who understand what security is. It is going to amplify the effectiveness of your security team. The best security champions are those who are people first. Okay. And this is, again, another parallel between agility and cybersecurity. You can know everything there is about Agile. That's not going to make you a good coach. The good coach part is, can I actually apply this body of knowledge I have in this one particular instance? And by the way, even more important, can I get this person to trust me? Relationships are first. You can have the perfect security answer for everything, make it easy and simple, but if people don't trust you, if they don't know you, they're not going to buy in. This is kind of what I mean by whether you like it or not, you're going to have to learn some coaching skills, some facilitation skills, because that is how you get people on board.
Also, having a security champions as a concept is also a very good idea, because as soon as you can get people on board, sometimes those are also the people that are likely going to become security champion, at least in my case. And for example, I'm using this concept very successfully with the engineering team, where I have people that somehow, let's say, are reporting me dotted line for what concerns security in the engineering team. And I noticed that it is actually working. It's not so formalized, so we don't really have like a job title security champion, so it's more of a concept. And it actually helps to scale the security team, because especially like in a small, medium business, you know, we were discussing yesterday, I think, in another talk about a ratio 1 to 100 of security engineers. So yeah, so like you need people that can help you to scale. If you can get people on board and let them help you, it's a very good team.
It is, and you know, sometimes I end up being a security champion, not because I know security, but because people know me and I talk to people all day. And so for security teams, it's going to make their lives a lot simpler if, as I'm going along talking about Agile, I also kind of talk about security and say, here's how those two connect. So take advantage of all of the people in your organization, because the ratio 100 to 1 is very, very true. And no matter how much money we throw at security people, there's just not that many people with skill set. Organizations are having a hard time finding people, and you can't be in 100 places at once. Trust me, I try. Doesn't work that way. You have to be able to work through other people. And this is the coaching challenge. Ultimately, my job is, how do I get people to change the way they think and behave with no authority whatsoever? Because nobody works for me. I can't hire and fire people. I just have to convince people to change how they think and behave. And that's a lot of the challenge you guys are facing. It's not just about here's my new security process. It's how do I get people to actually give a damn? Did that sound familiar?
Like I was saying before, in a sense, it all kind of uses those social engineering skills. If anyone, really does security and gets into pen testing and does those kinds of things, a lot of us are more apt to enjoy the occasional social engineering moments. So that's one of those, and we can really have fun with it.
It is, and I will say it for those of you who don't think you're people, it's a practice, it's a skill. It can be cultivated. As an example, I don't use anymore because it's pretty dated, but when I was in college, I was so shy. I would not order pizza because it meant talking to a stranger. Okay, that was me. Exactly. Now it's like I talk to people all day, every day about anything. But so I have an example that you can cultivate new skills and new mindsets. It's a practice and it's a commitment. I won't say it's easy. And for example, I'm still never going to be the world's greatest public speaker, but I can do it, and I can do it reasonably. So if you think this is not your thing, it may not have been to now, but you can make it part of your skill set. Any more questions?
We are approaching our last 5 minutes, which I would love to use for doing the debrief videos. But if our hosts are up to it, we can do it right after the hour as well. If we have any questions, we would obviously give those the priority.
I wanted to raise 2 points regarding the security champion program, especially in a developer security champion. One is we have to be very conscious of putting in a rewards program so that people are motivated to go that extra mile. And secondly, it's always a matter of measuring what has been achieved and what your goals are. So these two aspects I find very important when implementing a security champions program.
Absolutely. I would call that gamification. Gamification is a way of taking best practices from games and applying it to human behavior. And honestly, it works. People behavior changes when you give them small rewards, when you make public who's winning, who's losing, which team has higher ratio of things done. Like, it really does work to motivate people, even though we're all adults. It still works. So absolutely, yes, gamifying anything you can, making it visible, making it public, totally works.
There's an interesting point probably worth sharing around motivation and understanding how to best motivate different people. So social science has shown for probably decades now that if you rely on intrinsic motivators, you're probably going to get better performance out of people over a longer period of time rather than the extrinsic motivator. So if you pay your champions more money, you're going to get a shorter amount of higher performance. But if you understand what perhaps would help them give a sense of mastery or flexibility, autonomy, or purpose, these are the things that will give your security champion a very high level of motivation over a long period of time. As we're thinking about those different activities, I guess activities that kind of rely on those motivators, those intrinsic motivators.
Yes. And Daniel Pink in his book talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Not passion, purpose. I'm misremembering my own stuff, purpose. Yes, if you can connect these with people. For example, security team did not get me to help with security because they're paying me more. It doesn't work that way. But they're able to convince me that security is a good cultural attribute. If you can convince me, I will convince my teams. That's intrinsic motivation. Make it matter to me. Show me why it's a good thing. Help me get it. So I, in turn, can convince other people. There's a couple of other books. For those who are interested in this, Simon Sinek has got a book called Finding Your Why and Start With Why that are incredibly impactful for individuals and organizations, thinking in terms of motivation, starting with our why or value proposition. That's a great place to start. And there is a Japanese concept. This is more individual. It's called Ikigai. Finding your personal value proposition, or what I call just being in the flow. Ikigai is pretty interesting. So take a look at some of those things, figure out what motivates you, because that's how you're going to figure out how to motivate other people.
Okay.
All right. Yes. Thank you all very, very much.
Exactly. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Leila and David, for running us through, guiding us in these exercises. I will stop the sharing with you two.